think this is it in here. Yeah, this is it in here. Finally tracked it down. This will tell me. It doesn't tell me. Oh, what is it called? Bloody hell!
What does it look like?
It's not. It's like a little. It's a plant powder, and there's a little vial of it there, and I've smoked maybe half of it.
You're talking salvia, aren't you?
Salvia divinorum.
Okay,
that's what I'm talking
about. So yeah, just so you know, that's not DMT. It's very different. And
is it? I thought that had DMT in it.
As far as I know, it's not. But they're like cousins to each other. And
okay, that makes sense.
The best way I would describe it is salvia is like the angry evil cousin. You know, like if you were to.
It certainly is. I can attest to that. But I did have some interesting experiences.
Yeah, because I got some in a bag right here. This is the stuff I made myself. Because I grow this.
All right.
I grow the salvia, right, and then I have like a little vial of that's like DMT in there.
Right.
I don't know why it's here within arm's reach. And this is another one here, another vial of DMT. That's I don't know if you can see it in the bag there or not. There we are. It's kind of on the side.
All
there.
right. Yeah.
But this is stuff I extracted myself. I buy this root bark from. Oh, this is peyote cactus seeds for growing peyote.
Oh wow!
And then I got this is a sheet of something called MIPLA, which is like it's like a mild version of LSD. And this is
good lord, you're a regular pharmacopoeia there.
Yeah, this is LSD 25. And then I have this is some LSD 25 I got from Vancouver. I was on the West Coast one time at a buddy's wedding.
Wow.
And this is some LSD I bought from a guy named, he calls himself Jude. I'm pretty sure he's a shapeshifter.
Right.
And then what do I got here? I'm not sure what this is. I have to get better light on there. And then this is the stuff from the Netherlands. Comes in a black bag like this, like real fancy like. And it's got it's like a whole sheet, stuff like this, right? And that's the 1P stuff. That's so he has like a drawing of the compound in the back and stuff.
I'm with you.
That's my favorite.
You're not going to start tripping from just touching that stuff, are you?
No, definitely not. And then there's this stuff. This is the evil. This is called 25I NBOME. I get ripped off. Thought I was buying a sheet of acid, and the guy sold me that, and it was it was basically back at around 2009, 2010. It was very common for people to rip each other off with this stuff because it was legal. You could buy it on the dark web. You could buy you could buy a sheet of 1,000 hits for $40, and then you were selling them for $10 a hit to kids who thought they were doing LSD. And the thing about it is the high is incredible. I actually prefer the high over LSD. I think it's a better high, but apparently the LD50 is much lower, right? Like you could do 1,000 hits of acid and just have a really bad time, but there's no risk to your health unless you fall down the stairs or something, right? Where 3 hits of this can kill you. Whereas, which is and for me, I like doing 3 hits of acid or 5 hits of acid. It's nothing for me to do 3 hits. So when I bought this stuff, I bought it from someone I trusted, and I also shared it with a group of people. It was my birthday, and I said, "Hey guys, you want to do some acid? I got the stuff I got from the West Coast a few years ago. I got a few hits of that left, or I got this new shit I bought that's just I got it yesterday, And they're and I kept calling it maybe acid, and they're like, "Why are you calling it maybe acid?" And I'm like, "Well, I haven't tried it yet, so I can't say for sure it's acid, but I've never had stuff that wasn't acid that came on a piece of paper, so I mean, it should be acid. So do you want to do the should be acid, or do you want to do the stuff we know is acid?" And everybody voted should be acid. Let's do the new stuff. And as soon as we put it in our mouth, within seconds, I was like, "This isn't acid," because it made my mouth taste like I just bit into a grapefruit. And my whole mouth is coated with it. It was and it tasted synthetic. It tasted like a chemical. It didn't taste like actually a grapefruit. And that flavor didn't go away for probably 5 or 6 hours. And nothing. I'd be drinking glasses of water, and the water tasted like nasty grapefruit juice. And then so we go crack a beer, and the beer would taste like grapefruit juice. And I pour a glass of whiskey, and the whiskey would just taste like sour grapefruit juice. And I'm like, this is messed up. And I found, but the buzz was incredible. The visuals were nice. It makes music sound better than anything ever. Like it just it makes the music just absolutely sublime. And I find it like it's kind of an upper too. Like you feel like you're on some speed or something at the same time. So you feel like you're just ready to get up and conquer the world. And you sleep well. Like I find psychedelics are hard to sleep after, but I slept like a baby after this stuff. So all I did after that is I would like put the hit on my hand and spit on it and stick it on the inside of my nose, so I didn't have to like put it in my mouth, and that eliminated all that bad taste. So I went through like this, like I got like 9 or 10 tabs left, and I had 100 to begin with, and I found out after like 3 or 4 experiences what I was actually ingesting, because I didn't know what it was. I had no idea what I was eating, but I knew I liked it. I found out how lethal it was, and how much it was actually worth, and and it was kind of sad, and it created this like there was a weird thing happening amongst my peer group outside of my musical group, because I've always had like 2 distinct peer groups, my musician friends and then just everybody else, and inside the everybody else group is usually where I would find my marijuana and my other stuff. Like all my musician friends smoked and everything too, but we all got either from the same person or other people, but we didn't actually share amongst each other. Like I wasn't like buying drugs off my guitar player or bass player, there was this thing happening where like there was just all this dark stuff happening, undertones that I wasn't aware of. Like I could feel it, where I felt like these people were just slowly becoming shadows of the people I thought they were, and it ended up being crystal meth. Like they were all smoking crystal meth. I was like, oh, and I was the only one that wasn't doing it, because I'm very honest about what I'm cool with and what I'm not cool with, and I'm like the guy that like I'll eat shrooms with you, bro, and smoke some weed with you, but like I'm not gonna snort it or put it in a needle, like I'm not into that shit, and they would think it was hilarious that like I'd smoke DMT but I wouldn't smoke meth, because meth is much more mild compared to DMT, right? Like meth is like a buzz, whereas DMT is like, hello God, this is welcome to this corner of the universe,
yeah.
So I don't know, it was so I was convinced, and I'm still not entirely convinced, that it wasn't intentional, that my friend intentionally ripped me off and took, $700 of mine in exchange for $5 worth of something else, And,
right.
And so that became like, and it was almost like every time I ate the stuff, these people became darker to me, and I felt myself moving more and more towards music. And I would love that stuff, the 25i stuff. I wrote a good handful of songs tripping on that substance, and it was
right.
And the things I would write on it were like incredible. And I remember one day I had 2 friends over who were musicians, and I told them about this stuff, but I didn't know it was lethal yet. I told them about this drug I got ripped off on, and how I like to put it inside my nose instead of in my mouth, and all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. And one time I'd done 2 hits. The first time I tried 1 hit, and it was great. Then I did 2 hits by myself. And when I did the 2 hits, I had this like religious experience, like literally a religious experience while listening to Santana and John McLaughlin. And
wow.
And it was messed up because the name of the song is "In the House of My Lord," which I didn't know the song title until I was looking at the album trying to figure out why I'm having this religious experience, and but anyway, I ended up vomiting all over myself at one point, and like barely keeping consciousness, and feeling like I was just on the edge of existence. And I wonder if that was like me almost dying, or I just got sick, because after I puked I felt great, and the party went on in my living room, But
well, if 3 is a fatal dose, then 2 is 2/3 of the way there, isn't it? So
it is. Now, I don't believe that 3 is actually a fatal dose. I think it's like 3 may have killed a couple people, and now they're like, whoa, because like when I was a kid, they told us ecstasy would kill you. Like if you take a hit of E or a tab of E, 50-50 chance you're gonna die. And I don't know anybody who's ever died eating ecstasy. And I know people that have eaten it every day for years at a time, like they've abused it beyond. So I've come to accept that there's a lot of hype when it comes to that. And And I mean, like, how many people died of COVID, right? When they actually had like a broken leg or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So I wonder how much the drug is blamed for like non-things. I really don't know. But you're right. That was a scary thing. So you think about that, and I'm like, oh my God, I may have been dangerous. But anyway, these guys come over. I'm like, okay, guys, 2 hits makes me puke and want to die. 1 hit's like perfect, but like, obviously it could go a little better. So how about we all do 1.5 hits? Right? So that's what we did. We all did 1.5, like put them in our nose. And we went downstairs and we were jamming and like making some music. And it was incredible, the music we were making. Like, it was just mind blowing. And I had, the week before when I did the 2 hits and I puked all over myself, I wrote a song that day. It's on my album, the EP, the Only Listen to This Once a Day or Your Brain Will Be Destroyed.
Right.
The song's called Still Living Through Chemistry. So it was like this,
Right.
yeah. So we jammed for like an hour on this stuff. And then afterwards I was like, hey guys, do you want to hear a song I wrote while tripping on this stuff? And I played the song, and the song sounded almost just like the song we just wrote. Like, it had so many of the same characteristics, and I was playing the drums. So like, I had no control over the melody or the timbre of the instruments. I was the one keeping time. So it was a big mindfuck to us to be like, so that this drug was able to like predictably make us make a certain type of music, which was even more haunting about it, because because it made me enjoy listening to every kind of music, but there's a certain sound that you gravitate towards, without, I don't know how to really describe it, but there's that thing about like same with Salvia. Like, if you have a breakthrough Salvia experience where you lose consciousness, and you have you forget you're a human, you forget you've even smoked anything, like you're just coping with this new reality of whatever it is. I find most people describe the same experience. It might sound vividly different, if you analyze word by word, but if you take a mosaic of like 10 people telling their experiences, you'll find there's these common themes that if you discuss those themes with each other, you'll find that you're actually trying to describe the same thing. It's so hard to describe. You come at it wildly differently, but the more you just go back and forth, you're like, yeah, you're right. It actually was more like a cog. It wasn't a wheel. It was a cog. You're right. And it's like, and you kind of get this weird thing, and that's DMT does that. Salvia and I think other drugs too. I think psilocybin and LSD do it too. They're just much milder. Like, a dose of LSD is like a fraction of what you experience with salvia or DMT. But
well, my salvia experiences were limited because I tried a little puff when I was sitting in the living room watching telly, and it was very peculiar. It was like the room was made out of Lego bricks that were spinning.
Yeah.
And I felt as though on my left-hand side, I felt as though I was embedded in a French cobbled road, and the peloton from the Tour de France was riding over that side of me that was poking out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's what it felt like. And then I was a bit confused by that. I thought, what was that? So I tried again. And when I tried again, I prepared properly. I got my space all set up, and I took the two big hits as much as I could. And because when you try and hold the smoke in as much as you can, so you're holding it there, you're holding it, and then you let it out, and then you do another one, you're holding it, and by the time you're doing that, things are beginning to go very strange.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, oh, I really don't want to be upright anymore, and I just kind of fell over onto my side. And I found myself inside a rotting log on an alien planet. And there were 3, I can only describe them as Mexicans or South Americans. They had that aspect to them.
Yeah.
Sitting around a campfire under a starry sky that I didn't recognise, because I kind of know the stars where I live, and they weren't up there. And I was held inside this log by a membrane that I was trying to break through, and I was trying to catch their attention because I really wanted to be where they were and ask them, what is this? Where am I? So I was kind of scrabbling to get through this membrane, and one of the guys kind of looked over at me and said something to one of his pals, and they both went like like they'd seen this so often.
Yeah.
And it was just, he'll be gone in a minute, don't worry about him. And I was so disappointed. And then as I came round, I had a glass of water on the table in front of me. And this is only a few minutes, as you know, it doesn't take long.
Yeah.
And as I came round, I was thinking, I turned into Keith Richards. I suddenly understood Keith Richards intimately. I knew exactly why he was the way he is. I could see why he plays guitar so badly, because he doesn't give a fuck. I could see everything, because what he's really into is this moment when you're so fucked up that you've just had the most amazing experience and you're so fucked up that you don't give a fuck anymore. And as I reached for the glass, I was telling myself, don't spill it, don't spill it, don't spill that glass, don't spill that glass. And as I picked it up, I just poured it all over the fucking floor. And just had to wait until the thing dissipated. And then it dissipated, and after about, the whole experience was maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes long. And then at the end of it, I was left with a kind of itchy discomfort all over, which lasted for about a day. And it was like, oh God, this shirt is really itchy. And even when I took all my clothes off, which I did, it wasn't making any difference. The air was itchy, it was just, but that didn't last too long. And I don't think since then I've not done it, because that was just, it was amazing to be in that log trying to reach the Mexicans or whoever they were. And it was amazing to suddenly understand Keith Richards. But the rest of it was, I didn't feel that I learned anything that I didn't already know.
Yeah.
That we're connected in some way. That in some way I truly believe that was, it wasn't a real experience, but it was a real experience. It was, if you said that I was transported to another dimension and ended up inside a log I couldn't get out of, and there were people that I saw as, in inverted commas, Mexicans, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe aliens looked like Mexicans to me. I don't know. Because I don't know what a Mexican would look like. I haven't seen that many in real life. I only know them from the movies.
It could be just as likely you go back in time as you go into another dimension, as you go into, because and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Mexicans, because I firmly believe that psychedelics carry some sort of ancestral knowledge with them. It's part of because psychedelics are part of our collective, because we've been doing psychedelics as humans for as long as we've been doing anything. They're not like something new, right?
I think so.
I think so. And Salvia grows in Mexico. It's the only place in the world that actually grows naturally. Is in this one place in Mexico.
Well, that was the other thing. I thought, is that what this is? This is that. This is the something in the plant, or more likely the plant's a key that opens something, and that particular key opens that particular door. Are you recording, by the way?
Absolutely, right from the beginning. Yeah.
Oh, me too. So is it? I had a strange experience this week which kind of relates to that, because it's all about consciousness.
Yeah, perfect.
Because I think both you and I are interested in consciousness in different ways. Or the same way, but we're both interested in consciousness and what it is and how it might arise. There's a guy called Stuart Hameroff. Do you know Stuart Hameroff?
No, I don't.
He's a colleague of Roger Penrose, who's the Nobel Prize winning guy who used to be Stephen Hawking's boss.
Okay.
Essentially.
Yeah.
So he's a brilliant man. He's won the Nobel Prize. I've got 2 of his books by my bedside. I don't tell anyone, but I don't read them. I just have them there. So when the aliens visit, they'll think, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. No, I have read them. Anyway, so Stuart Hameroff is on Twitter, and I've been trying to get his attention because I did an album called The Quantum Mind, or The Quantum Orchestra, which is about the quantum mind. And it was him that came up with the phrase, the quantum orchestra. He sees consciousness more like an orchestra, that it's orchestrated by something in the background. And then of course, you get to the idea, well, what's orchestrating it? And that's the difficulty for science right there, because you go into a realm that's very, very difficult for science to deal with. So he gets a lot of criticism for that. However, I managed to get a response from him on Twitter. And he was saying something about consciousness being something about consciousness, and another guy came on and said something about universal consciousness.
Okay.
And Stuart Hameroff came back I replied to that and said that the cosmic filaments, which are these probably the biggest structures in the universe, we can't really see them, but we can map them. So you can infer where they are, and so you've got these gaps in the distribution of galaxies. So you're way beyond the distribution of stars. You're out into the distribution. So at this scale, the galaxies are like dust.
Okay.
Right. So that's the scale you're talking about. And these filaments, these cosmic filaments, are, huge. They're the size of the universe. Essentially, they make up the universe, and there's gaps between the filaments, and the filaments look almost like a kind of a foam, or a kind of connected structures with hubs and big tendrils going off to other hubs.
Yep, I'm familiar.
And I said to this guy, I said, well, every time I see that, it just looks like a communication network. That just looks like a communication network. And Stuart Hameroff came back, and it just fucking blew my mind, because he said, well, what you're seeing there, in between the galaxies, inside the galaxies and between the galaxies, all of that is filled with these proto-organic compounds. He's got all this scientific language for it that I don't really know. I had to ask my AI chums what he was talking about just to get it exactly right. But he's saying basically these organic molecules and the free electrons that are inside them, they fluoresce when they're hit by radiation. So they fluoresce, and they make entangled particles. Those entangled particles fly off in whatever direction they fly off in. And he thinks that's what's happening inside the human brain at the level of the microtubules. But if you think about what that means is that these two particles fly off in different directions, and say, from our perspective, a couple of billion years go by, and one of those electrons, photons, whatever they are, something interacts with it. The photon that is now 2 billion or 4 billion years away from that photon instantly is connected, because the quantum entanglement sorts itself out. So if you wanted to think faster than the speed of light, that's how you would do it. That's how the universe would do it. Because to think at the speed of light on the scale of the universe, a thought takes 14 billion years. You could argue that it's a panpsychist argument. You could argue that the universe is conscious, and there's the mechanism. That is a possible mechanism. If not that the universe is conscious, that's what informs our consciousness. And when we have these DMT experiences and all of that, that's what we're accessing. That's the thing that's kicking in. And what our brains is trying to do, we are connected to everything. But when you open the door and you're shot out and you land somewhere, it could be anywhere, and then your brain tries to interpret what it is that you've just accessed. And as you say, it could be time, it could be space. Effectively, there's no such thing as time and space. That's an illusion caused by consciousness. I think that's actually what's going on. So when you access, when you strip away the ego and you just get down to this bare thing, that is just attached to everything. That's what I think.
Yeah.
So no wonder psychedelic experiences are inexplicable, because if you could see the reality of what's actually going on in any other place, it would be inexplicable. You would not have the language to understand it, even if it was a relatively simple life form on another planet. We're infected with hubris as human beings, and we think that because we understand our world, we understand all the worlds, when we don't understand our own consciousness.
Right, I do find that hard to stomach sometimes with this. Like, they talk so absolutely about things that are imperceivable, by just holding a mirror up to themselves, going like, well, it must be like this because this is what we have here. It's such an ignorant way to think.
Yeah, and every time you look, every time we look somewhere we haven't been before, we find something we didn't expect. Every single time. Every time. Who knew 50 years ago or 100 years ago, when we didn't know even really what the planets looked like very well, that there would be a gigantic hexagon on the top of Jupiter?
Yeah.
There's a fucking hexagon on the top of Jupiter, and they're struggling to explain that. And it's not a conspiracy theory. It's not about aliens or anything like that. It's just saying you looked and you didn't expect to find a hexagon.
No.
And that's what I'm saying. Every time you look, you find stuff your theories didn't predict, that you had no idea it would be there, and you have to rethink everything. And, so no wonder that's the way it is. But I was really tickled this week when Stuart Hamroff got back, sort of made a response. I was like, oh wow,
that's awesome.
I'm going to be thinking about that response for the next 20 years.
That's awesome. I do find that I find it painfully hard to stomach too when science doesn't seem to acknowledge the fact that our microscopic universe and our macro or megascopic universe, telescopic universe, look nearly identical. Like there's so many similarities. I should say nearly identical. Like, I mean, obviously, if you cut yourself open, you're very different than what's outside of you. But I mean, when I know, like the very first thought, I imagine every single, oh, my phone's making noises. Let me turn that down. The very first thought any kid has in school, I'm sure, when they first see an electron and a proton diagram in electric class or in science class, they think, wow, that looks a lot like our sun and our moons and our planets. Like, wow. And then you automatically get told, no, don't even think of it that way. It's nothing like that. And then they describe to you about how it's working. And you're like, no, that is kind of how it is. Like, well, no, it's not gravity. It's an unknown force that keeps it together, and it's positive and negative and, it's magnetic and like gravity, like, no, stop saying that, like they, so it becomes this, I find that very hard, like it's the same, not to bring up Graham Hancock again, but the same kind of mentality that causes that infighting in science too, right? Like this, like, don't dare smear my microscope stuff with telescope stuff. Like those aren't related, and like, and if you look at the universe and it looks the way the consciousness maps out, and when he talked about consciousness and the nodes and the light speed and everything like that, like, I've seen that in my own mind in a massive psychedelic experience, and it's like this, level of geometry where you realize everything is connected in some sort of bizarre way, and it looks painfully obvious in that moment, and you have all the words and the thoughts and ideas to describe this grand discovery, but then as you come to, your brain slowly gets sucked back to like that third dimension, and all these beautiful ideas and thoughts and experiences you have become more and more alien, like a dream that you're slowly quickly forgetting, but it's I would not be shocked to find out that our consciousness is being puppeteered by some sort of universal consciousness that is far beyond just some sort of collective idea of like a thought we're connected to, where it's actually physically existing, like a supercomputer, like a giant sponge. That's what it looks like to me when they show you the filaments of the universe. It looks very sponge-like the farther you go out, right? And it's like, and
it does. One of the explanations for that is that it's the quantum foam.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the universe, if you look at the very, very tiny variations in the microwave background radiation, they sort of postulate that is the quantum foam from the early days of the universe. Roger Penrose has a slightly different, a very different idea, which is that those are encoded within the cosmic background radiation are circles that come from black holes from the previous eon, and he sees the universe as being a series of eons or a series of universes, one following on from the other, and that he says we should be looking for messages from the previous eon, because given the problem, given enough time, you would expect that consciousness or conscious beings would transcend, that they would understand, they would have the capacity to understand everything. So what he's saying is, if that is the case, then their task is to leave messages for the next eon, so that when people become sufficiently intelligent in the next eon, they can look back into what we see as random noise and pull out these messages which are have been encoded from the previous eon in the form of the radiation from black holes, which is the last thing that's left after that universe is done. The black holes are the last radiation. The only problem I have with that, it's a beautiful theory, and he says that he's done, is it stochastic, is that the word? Statistical work on the cosmic background radiation, the patterns that are there, and he says there are circles there. It's much argued about, as you can imagine. But my problem with that is that when you look at the scale of what Penrose is talking about, if it's realistic, and I don't necessarily know that it is, but if it's realistic, it means that the part of the universe that conscious beings live in, or the time of the universe that conscious beings live in, is a tiny, the 14 billion years that we've had so far, supposedly, if the Big Bang Theory is right, that is an infinitesimally small fraction of the total universe that will exist, but most of it will be empty. Most of it will just be stuff evaporating away for trillions and trillions and trillions of years. And I don't like that, because that means there's just mostly nothing, which is kind of, I struggle to get my head around, except that if time's an illusion, then that very, very most distant, what looks to us like the most distant trillions and trillions of years in our future, isn't really.
Yeah.
Because time doesn't exist. It's only us that makes time exist. Without us, there is no time. Without consciousness, there's no time. There's nothing to perceive it. And in the way that the sort of observation theories suggest that the observer is key to the whole process. That's why I think we need to, that's why I like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, because they actually have a testable theory of consciousness. They say it's in the microtubules deep inside the neurons. That's where it is. We can put electrodes on it. We have put electrodes on it. We've seen resonances. We know there's something going on. We know that anesthetic stops them. We know that when you take the anesthetic away, the vibrations start up again. Where does consciousness go when you anesthetize somebody? They don't know. All they know is it works. So I like their theory because it's testable. And if they're right, then you could imagine a future where we can share thoughts, where the kind of thing we're doing, talking across the Atlantic, is like the Stone Age.
Yeah. No, that's true.
That we just turn a switch on our cranial implant, and we're wherever we want to be, because we can be anywhere at that point.
True.
And that's the singularity, I think. I think that's the human singularity at that point, when you can plug into the whatever the thing is. Of course, inside a gravity well, it might be difficult to do that, because the gravity wells probably mitigate against a lot of that. That's why we don't see it. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Interesting.
I can hang on to a lot of that stuff. But I do have a hard time with the idea, or I maybe disagree, or maybe find that we might find. But the idea that time doesn't exist bugs me a bit. I realize that time travels at different speeds. It can be perceived highly differently. And when you're talking about the speed of light, time doesn't exist. I realize that like a photon that if the Big Bang is true, of a photon that was created at the beginning of the Big Bang hasn't aged a second since the Big Bang. It's still in its infancy of that moment, because of the way time and light react to each other, right? Or don't react, or become one, or whatever it is. So I do understand that argument, and that why we feel like it's the time as we understand it as a product of our relation to the universe. I think our size, our lifespan, all these other things. But I have a feeling that time, because I know time is the thing that fucked up Einstein the most too, right? Like in his dying words, the last thing he wrote, he talked about how much he regretted that he could never awake from the illusion of time, that because he was convinced it was an illusion as well, and that's why I find that so humbling yet so terrifying, because it seems like he had lots of answers for all the big questions when it came to the stuff we're talking about right now. Like he didn't delve too much into consciousness. He was more into physics and things to do with like objects and how we're relating to space and energy and everything. But I don't know. I have a hard time with it, because even time as we've accepted it, whether we have a watch on or not, we're constantly struggling with time. Like it's a sickness of ours, whether it's somebody's doing it to fuck with us or it's just a product of our current state of existence. But people spend much of their time thinking about what's going to happen or what's already happened, instead of enjoying now, and like Bill Hicks, right? Like I learned that from him, like when he was screaming into the microphone about, what about the children? The children are a future. And he goes, there is no future. There's only this moment, and I remember hearing that like when I was 12 years old or something the first time, and thinking like, no, you got it wrong, Bill. What do you mean there's no future? Of course there's a future. That's when you retire. That's when you have kids. Like that's the future, like that's part of like what's happening, but what he's explaining is like your future is undetermined, right? Like you don't, this moment only dictates what happens in the next moment, and then the next moment, and everything you're doing. And why worry about that? Because that's meaningless until it's happening, right? Yeah, you know that. I know you know that. But I know that like when you say time and I say time too, we both think different things, but I think time likely will turn out to be just another dimension. It'll be just another dimension they add on to it, and they'll have to struggle with how that factors into everything else. And it'll be something that becomes painfully obvious when we figure it out. And it's just a stumbling block for us in the third dimension that we're just trapped under, you know? Because, you know, Einstein believed that we should be able to move through time the same way we move through a room. You know, and I think that's a wild thought to have, that, you know, that he thinks that there's, if you become able to harness or enter or whatever it is, wrangle time the same way we wrangled space and air and ground and whatever. I don't know. That, to me, I always find that, like, it's hard to even wrap your head around that. And then you have all these people say, oh, it's impossible, or this and that. And all these, you know, people get angry because they've written books about other things, right? and, but I don't know. I don't know what to think. And I like theorizing about it. That's one of the reasons I like psychedelics too, because these are the kind of thoughts I have when I eat mushrooms or I eat LSD, and I think about the big stuff. Like one time, and I'm sure the thought was inaccurate, but I remember one time I thought, like, you know how the universe is supposed to be, or we were taught, or I don't know if there's still the belief anymore, but the general understanding, I think, is that the universe is expanding infinitely. I know there's still arguments that's not really the case now, and there'll always be arguments, but that's been the idea that we had the Big Bang and the universe is expanding faster and faster and faster all the time, right? And I was wondering about even ourselves. Like, how do we know if we're not part of that expansion? Like, how do we know the Earth isn't twice as big as it was 1,000 years ago? Because if the Earth was expanding, the universe was expanding at the same rate, so would be our units of measure. You know what I mean? Like a meter would be twice the size. You know, so it would be like, you know, so what's the point of even trying to wrap your head around that? You know, but those are the kind of thoughts I like to have, where it's like we're hyper-analyzing like aspects of us that, while we're completely ignoring, like you said, consciousness, which is like this important thing. We're like constantly outwardsly trying to like explode.
Yeah. Well, I went down the rabbit hole. There was a guy I came across on YouTube who had that theory that he took the idea of the universe expanding and brought it down to our level, and he said the reason the dinosaurs look so big is that they were just normal sized back in the day, but the Earth's got bigger, was his idea. But I don't think there's any scientific evidence for that, because the structure of those animals is the structure of a big animal. You know, it's not like, you know, the bone structure of a small animal is different from the bone structure of a large animal. So those definitely were large. I went down the rabbit hole. Yeah. I thought, wonder if because I even when I first came across the modern idea of flat Earth, I never dismiss things. Just go, that's ridiculous, like a lot of people do. I always go, well,
you have to.
Let's look at it.
Why not?
Because even though they might be wrong, there might be something about what they're saying, and at the very least, it's a kind of sociologically interesting thing to look and figure out the way people's minds think. But I don't think the expansion that you're talking about, the universal expansion, extends into gravity wells. I don't think it happens inside the galaxies. That's what I was reading about it recently.
Well, I don't,
because I was thinking that.
I agree with that. I don't think it actually happens. I'm just talking about how, like, when I was a teenager one time, I ate a bunch of shrooms, and
you were thinking
that thought
about
occurred to me. Like, it wasn't like an outside thought. It was just like, hey man, what if like we're all expanding and we can't even, but our units of measure expand at the same time? Like we, you know, what's the, you know, where does this even lead to? You know, like this, and I don't know, but yeah, I know what you mean, and I'm glad that like. You're right, and I know that they've disproven that, or it shows that it's like the universe is expanding and we're just all the same size and it's getting farther apart rather than actually expanding with it, you know, inside the gravity wells, as you say.
It's actually more complicated than that, and it's not something I'm very comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with the idea of infinite expansion. I don't like that idea.
No, me either.
I know Roger Penrose has kind of signed up to it, and he's got his cyclical kind of cosmological eon, what does he call them? Doesn't call them eons. Maybe he does call them eons. But this idea that, you know, that the universe is infinitely expanding and there was a Big Bang, I'm sort of holding out that it's not that. There are so many holes in the Big Bang theory at this point that I'm pretty confident that I can say at the end of the day, when they figure it out, it'll be a bit like that, but it won't actually be that. They'll go, oh, it was. because, like I say, every time they go a place or look at a place they haven't looked at before, they find something they didn't know. Like when the Voyager probes went outside the solar. Well, they didn't go outside the solar system, but they went outside the influence of the sun's particles. So they were no longer in the influence of the sun's particles. The cosmic wind coming out of the solar wind coming out of the sun. They went beyond that, and it's still vacuum as far as you and I are concerned, but they can measure the temperature of it, and it's hotter and denser than they thought it would be.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? If you go outside one star and it's hotter and denser than it should be, where is that heat and density coming from? That's very, very basic, and it wasn't wrong by a small amount that was statistical. It was wrong by we got that completely wrong. Same, people have forgotten that the cosmic microwave background was predicted to be a figure that it's not now. When they thought about it, they thought, well, it'll be this figure. And because it was only a degree or two out, I can't remember which round it was, but it was a degree or two out. People think, well, 1 or 2 degrees, that doesn't matter. But you're talking about absolute zero. You're talking about the 2 or 3 degrees above absolute zero. You're talking about factors of magnitude at that point.
Yeah.
So if you say that something's going to be 1 degree above absolute zero, and it turns out that it's 3, that's not 3 times the difference. That's huge.
Yeah, it's like
that's absolutely huge.
That's like 3 to the third.
I'm not a mathematician, so I could be talking complete crap.
But no, that's not. Yeah, I agree with you though. So
go on.
I was going to say, like, because when it gets to this kind of stuff, I can't help but think about 2 things that pop into my head, and I don't know if it's like a defeatist thing or not, but I think about Terence McKenna talking about we're just apes, with our fists in the air, demanding answers to questions we're not built to understand. We're not intelligent enough to even understand the answer if it was in our face. Or the other thing is like I can't help but feel like the more unexplainable it gets, the more obscure it gets from this like idea of understanding and like this idea of like constant expansion, and we're in it, but we're still inside of like this definite space of some sort. It makes me just realize we have to be in a simulation of some sort almost, like it's an imagination of something. It's a perceived idea. It's like we're in a computer model, and I don't mean like in the Matrix sense. I mean, that could be just as relevant as the Big Bang. That like say what if the meaning of life, take this from like Arthur C. Clarke or something, like the meaning of life is to create life. Right, like the purpose of our existence is to be able to get smart enough and able enough to create something as intelligent and as capable as we are, and then its job is to go and do the same thing itself. And then it's like a bouncing ball of, and part of that, the byproduct of that is creating new universes, because the new intelligence, you've birthed a new intelligence, which has birthed a new reality, which has birthed their version of whatever it is they're going to create for a universe or perceive it as, or. I don't know. It's, because it seems painful that way when you start to think about that stuff. You said like that, the uncomfortable feeling when you start thinking about the absolute magnitude of what infinity means or what continual expansion means, and then you turn around and look farther down too. And the deeper we look into stuff, we realize there's also a wall to that, right? Because it's almost like they don't discuss it in science class that like you can only look so far deep into something before you get to like the pixel. Like I don't know how long ago it was. It's sometime in the last 20 years they discovered that there is a smallest amount. It's not infinitely small. There's a spot where you get, and it's a measurable like, that's one chunk of existence aligned with a bunch of other chunks.
It's called the Planck length.
Yeah, right.
It's the smallest definition that you could ever have using the particles that they've discovered.
Yeah.
So they look at the tiniest constituents of all the particles, and they say, well, if we had control over that particle, that tiny, fragment of a particle, so not an electron, even smaller than that, something like a quark or something of that nature, and you try and figure out what is the smallest thing that we could ever know about, and it's the Planck length, I think. Yeah, so there is a limit to that, but what I think is, it doesn't matter. See, you're right. The only questions you can get answers to are the ones you're able to ask. So the universe looks like your questions.
Yeah.
The universe just looks like the questions you're asking. But so that's why people like Terence McKenna, Alan Watts, Richard Feynman, Roger Penrose, all these people that thought differently, asked different questions. And that's the most important thing. Ask a different question. Don't ask the same question. Why are we here? Well, why are we here? Well, that goes on. There's a whole sociological history goes with that kind of question, or what is the meaning of it and all that kind of stuff. I think when you unravel it all and you think about it, we must be part of something eternal. There has to be an eternity somewhere, otherwise you couldn't have anything.
Yeah.
But that's a human way of thinking about it. That's a very sort of, I began, I will end, therefore everything else must begin and end. I don't think it has to begin and end. I don't think we have to begin and end. I don't think we do begin and end. I think that's all an illusion. That's all from our perspective, because of entropy, because of the way that we perceive the world. But another way to think about stuff is to think that there are no such things as things. There are no such things as things. There's only events. You're an event, I'm an event. The phones that we're using are events. Pencils are events. Stars are events. Diamonds are events. They're just a thing that's happening. But we gather them together and call them things. And from the idea of things, we get the idea of numbers. We say there's one apple.
Yeah.
There's 2 apples. There's 3 apples. But that's an illusion. There aren't apples. The apples are gone before you can before the universe could notice that the apple's gone. So you said there was 1 apple. That apple went whizzing by. So the way to think about things is that there are no things. Because if there's no time, if time is an illusion, then things are an illusion too. Or perhaps things support our idea that there is time. You can imagine if we didn't have built-in obsolescence, if we didn't die, and we lived on a planet that had a circular orbit around its sun, with one face facing that sun in the habitable zone, what would tell you that time was passing? If you were a primitive kind of creature, you wouldn't grow up with the idea of time.
Well, especially if time, especially if nothing around you grew, like if trees didn't grow and like metal didn't rust and water didn't
exactly. It's a theoretical construct, I know, because everything does do that. So you're bound to notice, but we get our very concrete idea of time is based on the life cycles that we have. So we find it very, very difficult to step outside of that and say, but it's only because we are interacting on a quantum level with a quantum. Our consciousness, anyway, is interacting with a quantum thing, a quantum field that we don't understand. I don't understand. I don't think even Penrose and Hameroff understand exactly what it is. But it's that gives us the opportunity to experience time. And the great gift that we're given is that we get that chance. We get that one chance to experience time and do what we can with it. And that's all we have to do. You don't have to do a thing. You can be a serial killer. You can launch atomic bombs. You can be a saint. You could be anything. At the end of the day, it's all the same, because it's all an illusion. It's all for some purpose that we don't understand, that I think has to be eternal somewhere. Even if this universe, as you say, is a simulation, well, then something made the simulation. Well, who made that? Another. And you go back. I don't like that. Well, you haven't answered the question.
No, I know.
By saying there's a Big Bang, or by saying there's a simulation, you haven't answered the question. Where does it all come from?
No.
Eventually, you're going to get back to something that has to just be. And that's the thing I think we're missing. We're missing the fact that it probably is just something that is. That's why I've got an album called Is.
Yeah.
It probably just is. And you can't parse it. You can't interpret it. You can't get past it. And if you take the right kind of drugs, or you have a near-death experience, or whatever it is, you get access to a little bit of that. And it tells you in very straightforward language when you're there. It tells you exactly what's going on, exactly how it works. And you go, oh, shit, of course. So obvious when you think about it. And then that all goes away. The ego comes swarming back in doesn't want to know about any of that stuff, and you try to reconstruct what you've experienced with your ego, which wasn't there to experience it and was threatened by that.
Yeah.
So that's what I think. That's what I think is going on. There's something eternal somewhere.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. That's, it's been my experience and my hope at the same time.
I know, it's just I've only discovered this as I'm getting older. You get older, your beard gets white, and you're thinking, oh Christ, I hope there is something eternal, because my ego doesn't want to say goodbye to all this. No,
I know.
And it's that. I think that's what drives us as well, is the fear of the end. And I've pretty much managed to reconcile myself with that. I don't think there's any such thing as an ending for us individually. We see others go, we see others leave, but we never see ourselves leave. We never leave.
No.
Each individual is eternal. We're in the fabric. We've done it. We've lived that life, and the universe, God knows why, the universe wanted to know what it was like to be a civil servant for 40 years trying to make music, or a technician trying to repair washing machines and trying to make music, and be a dad, and all these things. The universe, and when you get back, the universe goes, thanks very much. That was great. And that doesn't matter whether, like I said, whether you're a serial killer or whatever you are. It goes, yeah, but we needed to know that. We found out something.
Yeah, who knows? Well, I'm just, I do enjoy having those thoughts too. They're ultimately futile for the most part, and they can be frustrating, and they can lead to pointless arguments and bizarre roundabouts.
Do you not seek seek some kind of resolution of these ideas that satisfies you personally? That's what I've done. I've got to the point where, yeah, I'll go with that. It's a belief. I know that. It's just a belief system. It's faith in a way. But I've had experiences in my life I can't explain. That one day when we're not doing this, I'll tell you about a day that I had, which I can't explain.
All right.
I can't explain through rational means. There were no drugs involved. It was just a very weird day, and it's the only day like that I've ever had. And I've got no explanation for it other than the universe was listening to me and put this there for me. It's the only explanation I can come up with, and I don't have a rational explanation for how that would work, other than there must be something.
Well, for me, it's like I haven't landed on something yet, I guess. It's not like I'm like I do. Like I said, I'm not. I'd say I find these thoughts, like I said, entertaining. I go there quite a bit, probably more than most people I know. But I do find like my feelings and my base level of where I kind of like land on, it's constantly shifting. There's no concrete down there. It's quicksand for me, So it's
right. Do you do a lot of reading of science or anything like that, or do you try and access the great thinkers?
I do. Well, science and theology. There's a book I have on the shelf here I've been struggling with for a while called The Awakening Intelligence by Krishna Hermati. He's like a guy from India that was very popular, I guess, in like the 60s and 70s. He was not a big fan of the hippie movement. He thought it was a bunch of shallow, it was a trend. He knew it. He saw through all that shit, and so he was a guru at a time when everybody thought they were a guru. But he was like the real deal. But I find it's hard to read that stuff because it's not like when I read a book, I want to be entertained more than enlightened, and not because I find just because I don't enjoy reading that much. Like I find opening a book is a chore. It takes me a good 5 to 10 minutes before actually it starts to flow, right? So, and if I'm reading about a guy, like it says like in this book, it'll be like, so when you say you love everybody, what do you mean by that? You have to say like, well, first we have to see what we have to find out what I mean by they, and then we'll figure out what the word they means.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then they spend so it's like the labor over one sentence for a fucking, a whole chapter, and your head just hurts. Your head hurts, and you're angry because you're like, yes, I knew that. I could have just turned all the 10 pages and went to the next sentence.
But what about people like Carl Jung and sort of the philosophers and the thinkers before the sort of modern era?
So Carl Jung was the first kind of thing I ever read like that. It was this book, Man and His Symbol.
Uh-huh.
Right, like that's probably his most famous book, I imagine.
When did you read that?
When I was in college. I was like 18, 19, maybe 20. I can't remember exactly what year it was. So sometime between 2002, 2004. And it was my favorite course I ever took in all of school, college, and anything. Otherwise, it was a course I took called Dreams, Myths, and Consciousness. And one of the books in the list of books you had to own for that class was a Carl Jung book. And I found that book fascinating beyond my wildest imagination when it came to him talking about collective consciousness. That's
and archetypes and things like that.
Exactly. And that's the stuff that really, like, I still talk about things I read in that book to people. Like the first time I smoked DMT was with two good friends of mine, Drew and Adam, and I know they wouldn't mind me sharing this. But we smoked DMT and we had this amazing experience, and we did it on a peak of an LSD trip too. So it was like amplified. And I remember Drew went first and went, holy fuck, gave me a little bit of advice. Then I went and went, holy fuck, and then handed the advice off to my buddy Adam, and he went like, holy shit. And the next day after Adam left, because Adam lives out of town and Drew lived down the street, so Adam left, and the next day I handed Drew my copy of Dreams, or Man and His Symbol by Carl Jung. And he's like, what? And I said, this book I've been talking about for years. I said, this means so much more to me now than it ever did. Like, this book actually makes sense to me more than it did 20 years ago or whatever, 15 years ago, whenever I'd read it. And unfortunately, he never read it. He just took it home, put it on the shelf, and then gave it back to me a few years later. I remember thinking, like, it was cosmic to me how much something like a psychedelic drug that gets frowned upon could make these great thinkers seem so much clearer to me in such an instant, because I saw it. I saw the archetypes, right? I experienced it. Like I watched our collective consciousness go back in time to the beginning of time, to the beginning of the universe, the beginning of our solar system. Like I watched it all, the dust coalesce together and become clumps and become eventually a planet. And I saw the sun shine its first rays of light, like it was, and I watched the lizards help the human slaves build the pyramids. Like I never believed in lizard people. Like I came out of my DMT trip going like, that fucking weirdo from the BBC was right. What's his name again? The soccer guy. Football guy. David Icke. Yeah. Like I never thought an experience to make me consider David Icke a rational human being, but I don't necessarily believe in lizard people any more than I used to, because it was a hallucination, right? So my ego is...
Yeah, but you are. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You are tapping into something.
I know.
Yeah, you could say that you could make the argument that you're constructing that. And one of the things that I think we've got to accept, and we have to rule out if we possibly can, and that's why I think the DMT experiments that are going on in London just now are quite interesting, because they're asking people in the moment what they're experiencing, and they're keeping them on the DMT trip for a couple of hours so that they can interrogate them as they're tripping.
Wonderful, isn't it?
And of course, what that does is that interrupts the trip. So you can't dabble. Again, it comes back to the observer theory. Once you go in and ask the question, you've changed it. But one of the problems, I think, is that people reconstruct memory all the time. They just do it all the time, because you can't. Nobody, even people who've got a spongy brain through with Alzheimer's or Parkinson or whatever, don't necessarily feel that sponginess. They don't feel the gaps. They don't know they've got gaps, and they fill them in. That's why people, the famous example is when the police interrogate people who've witnessed a crime, everybody says a different thing, so it's completely useless. But I think what we do, part of what we might be doing, and I think that the DMT test is going to find this out, is that we might be reconstructing after the event. And there was one guy I saw interviewed, and he was definitely doing that, I think, because he was saying, the whole experience became clearer a couple of days later. Yeah, that's because you're rationalizing it, and you're trying to construct it into something that you can present, because your ego's in charge now, and your ego doesn't want a gap. That's anathema to the ego. Doesn't want any ego death.
Yeah. It
doesn't want that. It just has to struggle to hold on to those moments. So it will fill in, it or some mechanism that informs it will fill in the gaps. So I think we've got to be very careful about being linguistically caught up in exactly what these things might be in terms of, were they Mexicans?
Yeah.
Was I really inside a log? Was I really Keith Richards? I'm pretty sure if you asked Keith Richards, he would say no. Peri Urban never was Keith Richards. He would know, wouldn't he? Because, well, I would have been in Keith Richards. Like that film, Being John Malkovich,
Great movie. Love that movie.
It would have been a different film if it was called Being Keith Richards, wouldn't it?
It'd probably just be like Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever.
His audiobook was brilliant. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it's read in part by Johnny Depp, and then by another actor, and then at the end by Keith Richards himself. It's a really good listen, actually, because Depp does a fantastic job, and Keith Richards has got an eidetic memory. His memory for stuff is incredible.
Yeah.
Right, quite incredible. So it's a really good read. Although I think he's a terrible guy. He's a terrible human being, and a rotten guitarist.
Well, it's funny you say that, because yesterday when I was training in Cape Breton, I was at a guy's house. There was guitars on the wall, and I was like, great, a musician, and his favorite guitar player was Keith Richards, right? Because
a lot of people say that.
Like, all his guitars had 5 strings on them. I'm like, where's your low E? Oh, Keith doesn't have a low E string in his guitar. And I'm like,
I've got one somewhere that's got, I think that acoustic over there's got its bottom string missing. I've got a whole album I need to make. I was just going to call it G.
Yeah, there you go. So and I think I insulted him too, because he was talking like he really believes Keith Richards is like the greatest guitar player, and I was like, I can't. I'm sorry, man. Like I can't get on with that. Like I realize why you like him, and there's lots to love about Keith Richards. He's one of the most famous guitar players of all time. He's got some of the catchiest licks ever written. That's undeniable, But to say he's the best guitar player, like he's not. Like it's just, guitar isn't even what he's doing. It's like it's a, but and this is coming from someone like I barely rate with him myself. If I were to compare myself to any famous guitar player on like skill level, I'd want to say maybe Jimmy Page, because I think Jimmy Page is a few notches above Keith Richards for sure. But I almost get like, I don't know, like my stomach turns a bit when people compare Jimmy Page to Jimi Hendrix or Jeff Beck. Like he was hanging out with those guys, but he is not anywhere close to being in the same league of those guys, I don't think. And
who, Page?
Yeah, I don't think he is. I think he's very well studied. He was a good studio musician, apparently, and whatnot. But like I've watched oodles and oodles of live Zeppelin footage, like that they've released, not like bootlegs, like their curated collection of released videos, and he's terrible live. Like he's very sloppy, so.
I know exactly what you're saying. The only sort of Led Zeppelin stuff that I really had for a long time was the remasters box set, or the remasters double CD, which I loved. That was me getting into Led Zeppelin, which was I was late to them, and that double CD is brilliant. So I didn't really know the albums though.
No way.
So there was a Led Zeppelin tribute act came to where I live, Musselburgh, the Brunton Hall in Musselburgh. Very small place. So I took my daughter, we went to see this, I think they're called Hats Off to Led Zeppelin. And the singer was so good. The singer was so good. He hit every note, even the really high stuff that Plant used to be able to do that he can't do anymore. Hit everything. He was fantastic. The bass player played all of the bass parts and keyboard parts that John Paul Jones plays. The drummer did the big sticks, hitting it as hard as he could. And the guitar player looked like Jimmy Page, but he played this in this really sloppy manner, And I thought, I was really disappointed. And then I went home and listened to the recordings again, and I thought, he was doing Jimmy Page. he was doing all of the slurs and kind of hesitational things that Jimmy Page does. You can hear it. I don't know what it is about Page, because a lot of it is well constructed and well thought out and well rehearsed. Yeah. And there's other stuff that you go, why would you do it that way? It's like, why did you do it that way? And that's just the way he does it. And I've got a lot of respect for that. Somebody who does things, that are a little bit uncomfortable when you listen to them. And people don't seem to notice. People still think he's right up there with the best, the complete antithesis of the speed running sort of fret wizards that we have now.
Yeah.
He's one of the old school group, of whom I think Jeff Beck was probably the most advanced, I would think, wouldn't you, of that old original set?
He's my favorite guitar player, so I'm always going to say yes. But the question is, Jeff...
Really? Have you got all of his albums, have you?
Not all of them. I got his good ones.
Yeah, I went through and listened to everything he'd done at one point. I do this with artists. I go through and I can't remember what. I think I have one. I'm not sure, or I downloaded them. But yeah, he's got one or two really good albums. There's one live at Ronnie Scott's, which is really good.
I don't. My Void in the Void on Tuesday night was all Jeff Beck.
Oh, was it? I haven't listened to that yet. Yeah. Well, I'll get to that.
And I played a song off live at Ronnie Scott's.
Right.
That's probably one of my favorite live albums ever made. I have the triple disc version too, with all the extra songs. So I played the song Blanket with Imogen Heap. And it was Jeff Beck covering her song with her on vocals. She came to sing. Oh, wow. And she does a flawless version of it. Like, it's just... Wow. Like, but that's... And he covers... I think he does Little Wing somewhere on that album, too. Uh-huh. And it just melts me every time I hear it. But that's,
is that the one where he's got the female bass player?
Tal Wilkenfeld?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
She was great.
Yeah. Have you listened to her records?
No, I have not.
Her albums are great. With Vinnie Calduta on drums. That's her drummer, eh?
Well, Vinnie Colaiuta, God,
she stole Vinnie.
You've got to stop doing this to me, man. I've got so many. You give me so many notes that I've got to go. I've got to go and look at this and look at this. I can't afford to love music any more than I do. It's terrible.
I'm sorry, but that's how she got to meet Jeff Beck, because Vinnie came to her school. She was 18 years old, like going to Berkeley or something like that, and Vinnie came in to do like a discussion or a demonstration, and I guess he recognized her extreme talent and her blonde hair, I'm sure. And and next thing you know, she was playing with Jeff Beck, and it's neat. Like, she's lucky, I guess, or there she just has good sense. But I listened to an interview with her, and Bill Burr interviewed her on his podcast one time, like 6 years ago, and this is where I learned all this information I'm giving you right now. And Bill's got a dirty mind, so he wanted to find out, like, did Jeff Beck touch you? Is Vinnie Calduta trying to like move in on the young bass player? And she said that like never once did anything sexual ever even get muttered when she hung around with those guys. Like, she was just one of the boys doing the thing. Like, she felt like she was part of the team, and that made me feel good, because I was, like I do my best to separate the art from the artist, but it would break my heart to find out that Jeff Beck was a pervert. Like, because he seems like such a wholesome guy.
Yeah, of course, yeah, of course, yeah.
Keith Richards,
yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised. But Jeff Beck would buy.
Well, there was rumours, wasn't there, about the guys in Led Zeppelin, and one of the sort of reasons given for them not getting back together was that they didn't want the publicity, because they felt that certain people were going to crawl out the woodwork if they ever toured in America.
Yeah.
But I don't know the truth of that, obviously. And I think the last time they were together was for that Celebration Day. At the O2 in London,
which is all right.
Which they
the first couple songs are sloppy.
I love that. I love their version of No Quarter from that. It's just
I'll take any version of No Quarter. Like, anytime I hear a new recording of No Quarter. Have you heard Tool do No Quarter?
No, I got into trouble with that one.
Oh yeah,
I did hear that, because I was going through a big No Quarter phase, listening to all the different versions, which is the best version, and Tool have done a version. Wow, I must listen to that. And I think it was recorded live in the studio or something.
No, it's live, like on stage, like at a concert. Yeah.
It's live on stage, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. And I left a message on YouTube to say that I thought this was poor.
See.
I got so much hate from the Tool fans.
You can't criticize Tool around Tool fans. They can't take it. They just don't.
No, I realize I realize that now. And in actual fact, that's a brilliant example, actually, now I come to think of it, of how to impress people online, is just to back down and admit you were wrong, which I did.
Oh yeah?
I said you're right, it is a lot better than I thought it was on first hearing. I didn't realise it was live. I didn't realise why they were doing it. It was a release that was made for their fans, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like it wasn't an official live album as such.
It was a peace offering between, like, they're in a lawsuit with the record label and weren't able to do any work. And they released this like live box set thing with music videos in it, and it was limited edition, and they didn't reissue it. It stayed limited.
Yeah.
It's like, so.
Well, see, I respect that.
Yeah.
Yes, it wasn't. I would still stick to my guns that, from my point of view, it wasn't a great version. It didn't add anything.
No.
But I was too harsh. I was thinking, who the fuck do they think they are doing one of the classic songs and fucking it up, you know? But that wasn't what was happening, really. I just got the wrong end of the stick. So yeah, I got a lot of Tool fans coming on saying, "Oh, right on, man. Now you need to listen to this album and this album and this album." And every single time I said, "Yeah, I'll definitely listen to that." And I think I've got one album.
Yeah, Lateralis, right?
Which I quite like.
Which is a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's the one.
I think
that's the one I got.
It's funny that you say that too, because when I first heard the No Quarter cover, it was right around, it was within a few months of me discovering the song No Quarter by Zeppelin. Because I didn't,
right.
Because of my age, I didn't get into Zeppelin organically, right? My dad had Led Zeppelin 2 on CD. So that's all I knew was Zeppelin 2. Like Moby Dick was the coolest thing ever. Like a 5-minute drum solo on an album. I'm like, these guys are maniacs. I love this. And my dad also had a copy of Houses of the Holy. But for some reason, the first song didn't grab me the way the first song on Led Zeppelin 2 did. And my dad didn't listen to House of the Holy nearly as much as 2. Like 2 was like on playing all the time, whereas House of the Holy was kind of collecting dust. So when I started listening to Houses of the Holy when I was like in high school and I was smoking weed and stuff, I never really got too far past the Rain song or Over the Hills and Far Away, because they're just great songs. And No Quarter is like side 2, right? Like it's deep in the album. And so I remember when I first heard it, I remember sitting in my car, like we were stoned and like just sitting down by a lake or something. And it came on and it was so spooky. Like it was scary how spooky that song is.
Oh yeah.
And it just blew our minds. Like, and my friends like, "This is Led Zeppelin, man. I didn't know Zeppelin was this awesome." And I'm like, "Neither did I." And it was maybe a month or two later, this Tool album drops. And we're listening to it, and we're like, no fucking way. Tool's covering fucking No Quarter. So we were just stoked that they were doing it. The performance and the audio fidelity and all that, like the vibe, it's not anywhere close. Like it's because again, it's live and it's just a bass. It's a bass guitar and a guitar player. There's no organ or mellotron or anything, right? Like so it's missing a lot. But and the lyrics are different too, which is like that's fucking with the lyrics, especially a song like that. That's
did they?
up.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, if you read them, like it's they're singing about in this Tool song is about walking through a desert in the sun, like and like the No Quarter is like it's at night and you're walking through snow, right? Like that kind of stuff, right? And he's singing about like dying in the sun instead of like dying in the cold, which I thought was kind of cool too, but. When I listen to the Tool version now, I don't think I can get all the way through it, because if I'm in the mood for No Quarter and I put on the Tool version, I'm like, this isn't No Quarter. I'd much rather listen to I've only listened to the Celebration Day version once. I've only listened to it once, but I've listened to the album version many, many times. I sometimes like the Song Remains the Same version. It's longer. It's got kind of a cool tone to it, you know. But yeah, it's just but the album cut to me is still like the Houses of the Holy original mix. Is the one that sends the chills down my spine. It's noisy, like it's got a lot of hiss to it. Like it's not really well recorded, you know, but that's become the character of the song for me. The remastered version doesn't sit right with me either. I need the original, which is common, I think.
You purist, you.
Yeah, I know. We should probably listen to some songs, I guess. Eh?
We should.
Too bad we'll never be allowed to listen to Led Zeppelin. They'll never let us listen to Led Zeppelin.
No, exactly. But you know.
Do you find it?
We'll get by.
Do you find it telling that?
Sorry, go on.
Do you find it telling that Jimmy Page has yet to release new music in like forever? Like the guy has never released a solo album. He did a couple, I think, Page and Plant things, which are mostly Led Zeppelin covers. But like he's never done anything. Jimmy Page has not done a fucking thing since Led Zeppelin broke up, really.
Well, I don't find that strange, or I didn't until you mentioned it. But thinking about it.
Maybe he sucked too much at guitar. He couldn't.
No, it can't be that, because he's you know he had his chops together well enough to be a big contributor. So you would think that he would assemble something and make it work. You know, he would. You know,
he's been talking about it
with guest vocalists or whatever. But yeah, I can understand, because the muse goes away for some people. It does, and if you had all that success in the early part of your life, and you felt it and you made it happen and you rose to the top and you got to the top. I can understand if the muse goes away. Now, for a less successful musician, when the muse goes away, they don't have a choice. They've got to keep going.
True, I guess you're right.
Like a good example would be John Martin. John Martin admitted towards the end that he had to keep gigging because it was the only way he could make money.
Yeah,
he had to keep going and doing it. He didn't want to be doing it, and I think a lot of bands are in that position. A lot of bands, a lot of individuals, the muse disappears and they can't find it again. Dylan talks about that as well when everybody says to him, when he was asked about the early stuff that was so iconic, and he says, well, if I could do that, I would do it, but I don't know that guy. That was a different guy. And I think that happens to a lot of people. I mean, I've seen it personally. People that I thought were great musicians who, just you meet them and you say, "Are you still playing guitar?" No, not so much, or they've always got an excuse or something. But basically, that feeling can go.
Yeah.
Not with the likes of you and I. You and I are well on. We'll both be probably making music on our deathbeds, because that's just the way we are. Yeah. But a lot of people, it just disappears. So I think that's what happened with Page. And so when the idea came around to do some stuff with Robert Plant, well, yeah, okay, we can do that. I know those songs. I can do that again. The Celebration Day thing happened,
yeah.
But then aside from that, as you say, it's just, you're expecting him to be the 19-year-old, the 20-year-old, especially when you get that kind of success. I mean, what would Jimi Hendrix be like if he'd lived?
That's hard to say, right?
I wish he had. But would he have?
I want to believe
would he have gone on and made?
My gut tells me he'd be like Carlos Santana or John McLaughlin. He'd still be playing. He'd have a giant band. And he'd be at top of his game. Like just because I'm not sure how you feel about Carlos Santana, but I don't think he ever lost his edge. He still has it. He's amazing. His new albums are still good. Like it's just.
Yeah, I've got one of his albums. I have the one that relaunched him again. I've got
Supernatural.
Yeah, he's that one. Yeah. Yeah, he's good. They're all, I just think that's what happens. I mean, if you asked Santana, you might find if you got inside Santana's head, that he would tell you, yeah, I wish some days I could just kick back and not have to do anything. But maybe I'm just projecting myself onto him.
He might be, but I get a vibe from Santana that he does it like I think to him his concerts are more than just a concert. I think it's church for him. He's a preacher. And, and I think it's off-putting for some people.
And he records, doesn't he? As he goes around the world on his tours, he records in different studios with different people.
He does that kind of stuff. Yeah,
I think that's one of the things that.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, I was very impressed by that. I thought that's a really good way of doing it. I'm in Japan this week, so I'll be recording with a whole bunch of Japanese people.
Yeah.
And next week it's Korea, and I think that's a great way to do it. Yeah, I got a lot of respect for that guy.
And he's one of the only guitar players that, like, literally, you hear people say all the time, you play one note, I know who it is. That's not very true for most guitar players, but it truly is for him. Like, he's one of the only guys that can actually play one note, and you're like, oh, it's Santana. It's absolutely Santana.
Yeah, he's got that tone in his fingers, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's good, like, with the one note thing. Like, I remember listening to an album with him and Alice Coltrane, and there's one song where he plays one note for like 2 minutes. And I remember listening to it going like, that's got to be Santana. Like, he's the only asshole that would even think that's acceptable.
Yeah.